Hello, my name is Erika Arban, and I am Senior Research Associate at the Center for Comparative Constitutional Studies at Melbourne Law School. I am also Contract Professor at the University of Milan. I am very grateful to Giuseppe Martinico and Cristina Fasone of Diritti Comparati for inviting me to present in this short vlog a volume I recently edited, Cities in Federal Constitutional Theory, which was published in August 2022 by Oxford University Press. The book takes as its point of departure the importance that urbanization has acquired in the past few decades, with cities becoming increasingly important thanks to a number of factors. First, there are economic and cultural factors, since cities are seen as engines of development, innovation, cultural and social interaction, but also places of business and commerce. They are educational centers that provide essential services to citizens. Second, there are demographic aspects that have driven the exponential growth of cities around the world, especially in developing countries. Third, there are diversity factors, with cities attracting people from different socioeconomic, cultural, ethnic, linguistic, and religious backgrounds. This growth, however, poses challenges if we consider that people living in large cities are often faced with deeper socioeconomic divides and inequalities compared to people living in rural areas. City dwellers also deal with more serious environmental and criminal problems, social and ethnic tensions, etc. Reflecting the complex issues surrounding urban areas, a body of scholarship has flourished in the social sciences, exploring the multifaceted urban reality through different epistemological lenses. But this prolific intellectual production has not been matched by an equally vibrant scholarship in constitutional law, where the city as an independent subject of study and theorization has remained largely neglected. This is even more so in federal theory, where, as Herschel contends, state-sized units and constitutional structures and doctrines conceived at the time of the emergence of the Westphalian state continue to dominate the scene. But urban agglomeration and the increasing tasks that cities are called to perform represent challenges that constitutional law scholars can no longer ignore. Against this backdrop of under-theorization of cities, in 2019 I convened a workshop at Melbourne Law School whose aim was to gather scholars to discuss this understudied subject. The most important message that emerged from the discussion was the need to develop a thicker theoretical framework in which to situate the debate on the role and place of cities in constitutional law and federalism. This is where the edited book comes into play. The volume collects contributions from prominent constitutional law and federalism theorists who have been pioneer thinkers in this field. The collection thus represents an opportunity for them to bring together in one place their theoretical reflections and contribute to enriching the research output in federal constitutional theory. I structured the book in two parts. Part 1 sketches the conceptual framework in which the work is situated, while Part 2 focuses on the status of cities as neglected constitutional players. The common thread that links all chapters is that they introduce the city as a constitutional unit of analysis in federalism and address several themes, such as the relationship between cities, federalism, and localism, whether federalism is good or bad for cities, whether constitutions should entrench cities as autonomous units, and how cities could be better equipped to deal with some contemporary challenges, such as criminal law reforms, environmental concerns, or digital developments. Specifically, in Chapter 1, I retrace the intellectual history of federalism as a constitutional principle, and then I delve into the historical treatment of cities as federal units. This leads to a broader discussion that is continued throughout the book on whether cities have the required features to become separate federated entities, independent from the local governments of which they are usually part. In Chapter 2, Cheryl Saunders and I focus on the constitutional position of local governments in federal systems. We identify how they contribute to desirable federal properties, but also the challenges in formalizing a constitutional role for them. The chapter then advances a concept of a partnership between local governments and other levels of government under principles such as comity, solidarity, subsidiarity, and equivalence. In Chapter 3, Maria Cahill and Gary O'Sullivan examine 4 types of justifications for increasing city autonomy: the consistency argument, the expertise argument, the stakeholding argument, and the distinctiveness argument. Then they test the extent to which these arguments track with 4 models of subsidiarity: subsidiarity as federalism, subsidiarity as efficiency, subsidiarity as democracy, and subsidiarity as respect for distinctiveness. In Chapter 4, Ron Herschel explores the significance of the federal unitary distinction in determining the constitutional status of cities, and identifies the Global North-Global South division as more significant in such assessment. He also investigates what national constitutions say about the urban-rural divide, claiming that federal constitutions are no more likely to address such divide than the constitutions of unitary states. In Chapter 5, Richard Briffault delves into the new doctrine of preemption in U.S. federalism to reflect upon the apparent conflict between federalism theory, whose values are better advanced at city level, and formal federalism, in which the states are the main units. In fact, in U.S. federalism, a conflict has emerged between cities and their states, with some cities pursuing progressive agendas and state governments rejecting them at state level, thus preempting progressive city action. Among other things, this highlights the failure of U.S. federalism to recognize the cities apart from their states. In Chapter 6, Hui Kong puts forth a particular version of Republican theory that justifies the constitutional entrenchment of a division of powers between territorially defined jurisdictions. He contends that cities and their residents have interests and characteristics that can be understood in terms of such Republican theory. Focusing on Canada, Kong posits that the Canadian Constitution should be amended to entrench the status of cities, and shows how such entrenchment might serve Republican ends. He also offers policy prescriptions for achieving entrenchment. In Chapter 7, Will Bartlett suggests that the diffusion of powers intrinsic in federalism can help generate a more effective criminal justice system. Federal states are grounded on the idea that decentralization yields important advantages, but then federations ignore such advantages when reforming criminal justice systems. Bartlett contends that empowering cities can introduce the benefits of federalism to criminal law reforms. In particular, urban accountability mechanisms provide cities with tools for understanding, debating, and holding accountable the discretionary decision-making of police and prosecutors. In Chapter 8, Rebecca Nelson discusses legal mechanisms that could help cities better face environmental issues. The adoption of modern constitutional environmental rights provisions speaks to the magnitude of contemporary environmental threats. However, the centrality of cities in causing and experiencing environmental threats remains substantively unaddressed by constitutional scholars. In Chapter 9, Biljana Petkova examines the tension between the traditional anonymity of city life and the datafication of cities, and suggests that the rising economic and political power of cosmopolitan, data-rich cities calls for new understandings of federalism in a digital age. By looking at a range of North American and European examples, the chapter explores how the link between privacy and big cities translates into both a normative commitment to diversity and varying legal privacy protections. Finally, in Chapter 10, Richard Schrager considers the mismatch between cities' increasing economic, political, and sociological importance and their relative lack of status in constitutional theory, and contemplates ways in which cities could be empowered. This lays the groundwork for the broader argument that state-based federalism is bad for cities. The old federalism is based on the theory that subnational governments are limited in their policy choices and presumed weak and ineffectual cities. A new federalism would recognize the central role of cities in an urban-based political and economic order and provide them powers commensurate with that role. This was a brief summary of my edited book. I hope you enjoyed the presentation. And if you share any interest for this topic, please get in touch so we can continue the conversation. Thank you so much for listening, and again, many thanks to Giuseppe and Cristina for the invitation.